Well, good afternoon and welcome to Overdevest Nurseries. It's late afternoon in midsummer. It is, as they say, hotter than hell. The temperature needle is well into the 90s, and this poor old European buttercup is wilting in the heat and humidity. But look here, look at these wonderful Panicle Hydrangeas, how pristine and beautiful and magical they look now in all of that temperature. These pristine white flowers just seem to take the temperature right down with their icy white color. And the contrast between the dark foliage and these gorgeous white flowers is really serene. Now, I'm filming this deliberately late in the afternoon. Virtually everybody else has gone home. The activities on the nursery is finished for the day. There's just one or two of us here. And it's a great time to be able to be out here and enjoy the garden, just like you would do at home. Especially if you're a working person, you're away during the day, and in the evening, it's a time to let the stress button out, take things down a little bit, and just enjoy the magical qualities of being outside in your own garden, in your own little piece of paradise, and particularly if you've got hot temperatures like we have today, enjoying all of these gorgeous flowers. Now, we're here in part of the trial garden here at the nurseries. This is where we test and trial new varieties to make sure that they really do perform well in this region. And one of the great things about this is that it gives me an opportunity to show you the tremendous diversity that you can get in growing these really tough and hardy and very easy to grow, and as you see, very beautiful shrubs. And the important thing to mention right off the bat, and that is that they're really very hardy. You see, they're native to northern parts of China, Japan and Korea, and the Russian-controlled Sakhalin Island, which is way north of Hokkaido, the most northerly part of Japan. So we don't need to worry about hardiness. They're very capable of dealing with our winter conditions right through the whole of our region. And the other bit of good news that I wanted to tell you about growing Panicle Hydrangeas is that they're really very easy to grow. In fact, they're not really demanding at all. Almost any soil will be fine as long as it's free draining. They just do not like to have their feet in wet, heavy soil conditions. And if your soil is a little on the sandy, rocky or gravelly side and therefore likely to dry out during the summertime, like we're doing here, put down a layer of mulch. A good deep layer of mulch will certainly help to conserve moisture. They're not at all fussy as to whether your soil is acidy or limey. They're not really bothered by anything like that. When you plant them first, make sure to dig a good sized hole and incorporate some organic matter and water them well until they get established. Outside of that, really you'll see that they're really very easy to grow. Oh, and one other thing I should mention, as you see here, they really do best out in a nice sunny open position. They'll grow okay in a partially shaded situation, but you'll find they'll kind of get drawn up a little bit and perhaps might be a bit floppy. As for pruning, as you may have seen in one of the other videos here on this site, we go through and we prune all these plants in the early part of the year. You can check out that video. It will give you some information about how we do it and how you can do it too. And also in there, you'll see that we give them a little slow release fertilizer at the start of the year. That's enough to keep them going through the whole of the season. Be careful not to over fertilize, because if you give them too much fertilizer through the year, they're going to take it up, they're going to grow probably lush and rank, and then with the ones that carry the big heavy heads are likely to perhaps be a little on the floppy side. And I just want to show you how you can go about watering them as well. A little bit of water during the hotter, drier periods like this will certainly help to keep them fresher and going And there's a little technique that I want to show you about how we do it here that I think is worth passing on. Now, I should probably say right at the outset that once hydrangea paniculatas become established in the garden, they are remarkably drought tolerant and they don't need a whole lot of watering. That said, when we get into dry periods in the middle of the summer, when you start to see the grass turning brown and it's crisp and dry, then it's probably a good idea to get a hose pipe like this, and also a rose like I have on here that dissipates the water out into a spray pattern, and then hold it in at the base of the plant and give them a good soak for at least 2 or 3 minutes, because when you do that, you're concentrating the water right on the crown of the plant. It will then drain down to the original soil that the plant was grown at. It will then dissipate out into the ground to where the root system is now all round the plant. And of course, the fact that you have the mulch there will also help to conserve that moisture. Sometimes when I'm out driving around, I see people in the garden and they're out spritzing with a hose. That's better than nothing, but to be honest, it's really not doing a lot of good. I think if you get in like this and give them a good soak, you'll find that the watering will be much more effective. The plants will look fresher, the flowers will last longer, and it will really just be a much more effective deal. So when you get prolonged or dry periods, certainly give them some water at that point. Otherwise, most of the rest of the year, they probably don't need a whole lot of watering. And there's a lot to be said for planting them in informal numbers too. I personally tend to avoid trying to plant things in balanced numbers, 2s, 4s, 6s and so on. Rather, what I like to do is to plant them as either individual specimens mixed in with other shrubs, kind of like here on this bed, or else in informal numbers, 3s, 5s, 7s and so on. That way, if one of them doesn't quite do as well as the other ones, it doesn't matter so much. If you've got 2 plants that are balanced, or you're trying to balance them, and one doesn't quite make as much vigor as the other one, you're all the time wishing that you could grow it stronger. Whereas if you plant them in informal numbers, I think that's a more natural arrangement, kind of like we find plants in nature, and therefore, to me at least, it seems like it's much more pleasing on the eye and the result is much more effective. And the fabulous thing, of course, is that nowadays there's a wide selection of ones that grow at different sizes too. From the little tiny toty ones that only grow a few foot tall right at the front, to medium-sized growers, to taller, more upright growers that you would use perhaps at the back of a border, right up to the big old PGs, as we used to call them, Paniculata grandifloras, that you're going to see in older neighborhoods that are maybe 12, 15, sometimes even 20 foot high. There's a place in every garden for these gorgeous plants. Now, if you only have a tiny little space somewhere, then of course you could plant just 1 or 2 of these. You could use them kind of like we have them here, planted along the fronts of beds and borders, and then graduate the heights with taller growing ones behind them right up to taller ones, and you have that beautiful effect then of all of this different height arrangements if you have a border that's wide enough to take them all. Wherever and whatever size of garden you have, I'm sure there's a place somewhere in your garden for some of these fabulous varieties. And they come in a wide variety of colors too, from ones that are shades of green through to alabaster and cream colors, then pure white, snow white ones, and then as the season progresses, some of them start to take on pink flushes, and then as we get into cooler autumn nights, then we start to get some really interesting colors of deeper pinks, bicolor pinks, so you get a very nice kind of two-tone pink on them, and even some of them that turn shades of red. Right through the whole range, but of course white and shades of white is the predominant color. And the thing that I'm most excited about is the fact that they continue to give us colour for a very long period, right the way through from early summer literally to late autumn and early winter. Ones like this little variety here, Early Evolution. This is one that we published a video on some weeks ago showing how it's the world's earliest flowering hydrangea paniculata, flowering literally in early summer. It's followed a few weeks later by this variety here. This is Quickfire from Proven Winners. And then there are other ones that come in a little bit later than that, taking us through to summer, to midsummer, through to late summer, and even into the fall, into the autumn time. And if you've been looking through our channel as well, you'll have probably come across some videos where we feature a technique that we've perfected here on the nursery to ensure that they flower in the very back end of the season when the nights are coolest, because then when you have night temperatures that are less than 70 degrees, that's when you get fabulous pink colouring on them going into the autumn time. And to just tell you about it, is what we do is we cut them back a second time. We trim about a third of the growth off before the 4th of July. That leaves enough time for them to grow out, set flower bud, and then for the flowers to grow out in those cooler periods, and that's when you get fabulous pink colouring on many of the varieties, as well as extending the season from early summer all the way through to the frosts of the autumn. And they come in a wide variety of flower shapes and sizes too. Take for example this one here, big, enormous pyramidal heads packed with lots of these florets around the outside, makes a terrific scene, especially when they're carried on strong, sturdy stems like this one. Then there are some that have much smaller flower heads. They produce more of them, so they are not quite as big, but they're carried in great quantity and therefore make a very nice impact in the landscape too. Some that have nodding heads, and also I'm very fond of the lacy ones, the ones that have a really kind of cool, elegant look to them, and some of those will change color as well between white and pink. And then of course you get flowers that are in between. They're kind of lacy, but they also have big heads like this one on there. And in windier open sites, the ones that have less florets and that lacy habit might be more effective, because obviously they won't have quite as much resistance to the wind. Lots of different types, and all of them absolutely fantastic. And speaking of flowers, let me explain that each of these heads is actually made up of two different types of flowers. On the outside here are lots of these sterile florets, a kind of modified sepal, and the idea in nature is to attract in pollinating insects and say, hey, this is where you need to be pollinating, this is where the flowers are. And then if you look in behind all of these little flowers on the outside, you'll actually see the real fertile flowers in there. They're little tiny white star-shaped flowers, and they are the real flowers. And over time, nurserymen, hybridists, and gardeners too have kind of selected the forms that have more concentrated heads with lots of these sterile florets on the outside, and they of course are the ones that make such a terrific and eye-popping display. Now it goes without saying that something like this with all of these gorgeous flowers will make a beautiful floral arrangement too. And if you're thinking about using them for cut flowers inside your home, there are of course the different types. I find the big ones are wonderful for if you're doing things like church arrangements or perhaps a wedding or a large room like a ballroom, because they're in scale. The little ones make very nice small arrangements too, but I like to really use the smaller or medium-sized growing ones. I find these flower heads are really more in scale with the size of our rooms inside our homes. And the best time to harvest them is either first thing in the morning or last thing at night. When you're choosing them, try to pick blooms like these ones that, as you see, are now virtually fully formed. The florets here, as you see, are all out. There's a little bit of development still at the tips of these shoots that has to come out, but pretty much all of this flower now is fully formed and therefore likely to last longer and give the longest possible vase life. As for doing it, just get a good sharp pair of pruners, and then you can trim down the stems, taking out a good length of stem like this. You're not going to do the plant any harm. Taking off a few blooms every now and then is really not going to affect it at all. What I do is I strip off the lower leaves to reduce the transpiration of it, and then as soon as you can, when you remove the bottom leaves, plunge them up to their neck in a bucket of water and leave it overnight in a cool place. Then the next day, when they're properly conditioned, they'll be great for taking and putting into an arrangement, and of course will add considerably to the display inside our homes as well as outdoors here in our gardens. And believe it or not, they dry very well too. The technique is a little different. You really pick ones that are fully formed, that have all of these florets that feel nice and sturdy. If you were to pick ones that are a little soft, they're going to flop too early, they're going to shrivel up. So you need to choose ones that are fully formed. And then what you do is you take them and put them in a bucket of water with just an inch or two of water, just enough to keep the tips of the stems submerged. Then as they naturally dry out with a little bit of the water evaporating out of the bottom, you'll find that they will slowly change into a dried state, and that's when you can use these as dried flower arrangements. Of course, they'll turn a kind of light beige color, but they'll be very pretty, and of course they will last for years. Now, if you'd like to find out more about all the wonderful panicle hydrangeas that you can grow in areas around your home, can I suggest that you take a few moments and scroll through the videos here on this channel, because on there we featured several of the varieties that we've tested and trialed here and we grow in our nurseries and send out to our partnering garden centres all over the region. Lots of really good varieties that we know are excellent, very beautiful plants that perform really well right here in this region, even during the sultry dog days of summer. This is David Wilson. Enjoy your gardening. It's good for us, and it's really good for the environment too.